Before we address this fundamental assumption that the KJV is the standard and modern versions are distortions, it's worth pointing out the irony here. To explain, it's essential to understand that the KJV was not the first English translation. You had Wycliffe's translation in 1380, credited with being the first English translation of the entire Bible. Then, in 1526, William Tyndale saw a need to produce a new English translation for various reasons. First, Wycliffe's translation was based on the Latin Vulgate. Tyndale translated directly from the Hebrew and Greek. Second, Wycliffe's translation was in Middle English. Tyndale translated into the modern English of his time so that the common person could understand.
Here, it's very obvious he does a lot of storytelling, making historical statements that he gives no documentation for. Now, I have read documents and sources that perhaps state such claims that he presents, but that does not mean they are factually true. James White does the very same thing in his book, The King James Only Controversy, which I have read twice. There's a lot of storytelling, but no documentation. That's dishonest. This is what a lot of these Bible correctors do. State a lot of claims, but give no documentation, no proof. For example, he states, then in 1526, William Tyndale saw a need to produce a new English translation for various reasons. First, Wycliffe's translation was based on the Latin Vulgate. Tyndale translated directly from the Hebrew and Greek. Wycliffe's translation was in Middle English. Tyndale translated into the modern English of his time so that the common person could understand. First of all, where is your source of Wycliffe stating his translation was based from the Latin Vulgate? By the way, just because the Latin Vulgate may be similar to Wycliffe's translation, that doesn't mean that's where he got his translation from directly. Unless he states that, then there's no reason to conclude that. You can believe it, but it cannot be proven as fact.
Again, that's the entire point of a translation, to convey the meaning of the original words so that regular people can understand them. From there, you have the Coverdale Bible, the Geneva Bible, the Bishop's Bible, and then eventually the King James Bible. So the King James translators themselves had to make the case for an updated English translation. They had to defend the idea that you have to continue to provide translations of the Bible in a language that people can understand.
Okay, so where is your source that they had to defend the idea of making continuous translations that people can understand? Did somebody hold a sword to their throat and make them do it? And tell them that if they didn't, they would die? Your statement is implying obligation. Where is your documentation for this? He does not give such proof. Again, this is what Bible correctors do. Make wild allegations with no documentation. Dishonest, there's no reason to believe him at all.
In fact, some people opposed the KJV when it first came out.
Stop it here again. This is another pet peeve of mine. People who carelessly use the word fact, like James White does many times in his book. When you say in fact and make a statement according to history, you're making the statement like you were directly there observing it. Well, that's a lie because you were not there. That is, unless you are over 400 years old. I mean, come on, let's be honest here. It is true that there are historical sources that claim the Pilgrims rejected the KJV when it first came out. Can we prove that as fact? No.
Much like KJV onlyists today oppose modern translations, the Pilgrims didn't like the KJV. They preferred the Geneva Bible and considered the KJV to be too liberal.
Here he does the second attempt of storytelling, telling a story about the Pilgrims when he gives no documentation of such statements. Where's your proof of documentation that the Pilgrims consider the KJV to be too liberal? You did not give any. This is probably the fourth time he has done this. I mean, I don't know, maybe other times. Of course, I'm not keeping tallies here. Making wild statements, and there's no documentation. That makes him dishonest. But he expects you to believe what he says and not challenge him on what he said. because if you challenge him, he would probably cut you off and dismiss your challenge and conclude that it was disrespectful or causing division or it was mean-spirited or arrogant to challenge him. Then he wraps up his argument basically concluding that the irony of the KJV only position is that they reject to or object to modern translations basically the same way that the Pilgrims reacted to the KJV when it first came out. Watch this.
So, you see the irony when KJV onlyists hold to their preferred translation as the standard against which modern translations are judged. The KJV itself was once judged as the new modern version.
Now, I do admit that there is a similarity regarding the reaction and rejection of another Bible itself, but does that refute the idea that the KJV is the standard by faith and logic? No. It's just a similarity of events. That's an illogical argument that he made, but he will repeat the same blunder later on when he tries to tie the honest admissions of the KJV translators to the KJV itself. Interesting.
Another point of irony is that the KJV translators themselves were not KJV onlyists.
There it is. Just because the KJV translators were not KJV only, that does not disprove the belief in King James onlyism. You see, he's already repeating the same blunder he did the first time. That's like a common statement the anti-KJV people say. Well, the King James translators never implied or stated that their translation was inspired, therefore that proves the KJV is not inspired. But that's an illogical, stupid argument because no Bible writer in the Bible text ever claimed their writing was inspired either. There's no record of it. So, to be consistent with that argument, that means all the Bible writings within the Bible itself is not scripture, it's not inspired, and therefore it's not of God. That's crazy thinking. You can't take the honest admissions from translators about their product and apply it to the product. Just like there are times that we as believers will doubt ourselves if we are right with God because doubting and being worried is within our sinful fallen nature. Does that mean we are not right with God and we're not saints? No, that's ridiculous. You can't apply an honest feeling of doubt to the truth of salvation. But then he explains how the KJV translators admitted their limitations and how they had to guess at certain words and stuff like that.
The 1611 KJV 11-page preface titled The Translators to the Reader. In this preface, the translators explain their views regarding Bible translation, why a modern translation must be produced to reflect the common language of the day, and humbly acknowledge their limitations. They even explained that their translations of certain obscure words were best guesses based on a lack of information, which is why they included marginal notes. There be many words in the Scriptures which be never found there but once, having neither brother nor neighbor as the Hebrews speak, so that we cannot be helped by conference of places. Again, there be many rare names of certain birds, beasts, and precious stones, etc. Now, in such a case, does not a margin do well to admonish the reader to seek further, and not to conclude or dogmatize upon this or that peremptorily? Here we see that the KJV translators had no concept of an inspired translation. If they did, they wouldn't have put alternative renderings of certain words in the margins of their translation. They acknowledged the need for revision and correction over time as new information became available. Once again, the KJV translators were not KJV onlyists. They defended the need for a modern translation in the common language and acknowledged their limitations in their translation and the need for revision and correction.
Okay, so what? That doesn't prove the product KJV is erroneous. Again, go back to my examples given before. This is an illogical argument. Honesty within yourself does not disprove the legitimacy or the logical belief of the subject.
These facts fly in the face of KJV onlyist claims that the KJV is itself inspired and that modern translations are perversions.
No, it doesn't. See my explanation given before. The KJV is inspired, and I'll prove it right now. 2 Timothy 3, verses 16 through 17, as you see here. Now, people say, I believe the KJV is inspired. I don't. I believe it was given by inspiration of God. Why? Because that's what it said. If all Scripture is God-breathed, then God breathed into the Word, therefore the Word has and gives life. Do you have the Scriptures? If you do, then they are given by inspiration. And if they are given by inspiration, then they are alive. For example, let's define a few words. Final, Webster's 1828, as you see here. Also authority, from the same dictionary. So final authority, that phrase actually means the conclusive legal power of the right to command, which is a power derived from the ultimate respect claimed in justification and testified. Is the Bible that? If you say no, then there's no point in asking Bible questions or having Bible studies. Check that out. 2 Timothy 3:16, as you see here. Now, all the classes of people mentioned above, in terms of Bible correctors, will tell you that it's only referring to the original autographs, therefore only the originals can be given by inspiration of God. But the only problem is you have to look at the context of verse 15, as you see here. Now, please explain to me, was Timothy raised on originals or copies of the originals? The answer is obvious, copies. Now, in reading this, you might be stating, well, translations can't be inspired. What school or church did you hear that in? The first time you read an Old Testament verse being quoted in the New Testament, you're reading an inspired translation. Did you know that? You want proof? How about these examples here? See that? Interesting. So this man is wrong. He's using, just because the honest admission of a committee, that means it applies to the product. That's illogical, stupid thinking. Just because somebody's honest does not stop God from preserving his words. It doesn't stop him at all.
Does the KJV contain translational errors? Let's challenge this KJV-only claim directly. Is it true that the KJV is without error, which means that it cannot be improved upon by definition? Is it true that there's no verse in the KJV that can be translated better? No, not at all. While the KJV is a good translation, it's not a perfect translation. And this can be proven. We'll just give a few examples.
Now, before he gives these two examples, we must let facts be presented first, which he does not do. The word error, as you see here in the definition. If an error is wandering from the truth, then you would have to have the truth presented to be able to identify an error. Also, an error must be based on fact and not by opinion, hypothesis, theories, thesis, feeling, etc. A fact consists of three elements: evidence, witnesses, and reality, personal observation. So regarding the KJV having errors, the fact must be proven as follows. First, the evidence. You must have the truth, inerrant scripture text, as the standard of truth. Witnesses. The writers of witness of the standard of truth. Reality. You must observe the standard of truth, the inerrant words of God. If you don't have all three, then an error in the KJV cannot be proven as fact. Therefore, no claim of errors can be stated or claimed. Does he have the original autographs, which were given by inspiration, which were the supposed only inerrant words of God? No, he doesn't. So the fact is, according to logic and consistency, you have to have the original autographs. If you don't, then you cannot claim anything as an error. Because you can't use a text to correct another text if you believe the text you're using has errors too. Because you don't know that section of that text you're using doesn't have an error or it's not an error either. You see how circular and illogical and stupid this argument is? But you will see the two supposed examples of errors in the King James Bible he tries to point out are nothing but opinionated, false accusations. We will get to that in the next video to keep this video short. So stay tuned for part number 4 of his two examples. You'll find they are flawed and not errors because it cannot be proved as fact, only by opinion. Stay tuned, brethren.